Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment. This is going to be lesson number 12. I want to show you something. We did something at the break there. We were talking about this at the break. This is pretty interesting. You've heard me talk before. Well, you've seen the passages in your Bible, let me say it that way, about paths and ways. And I told you that once you get out from that buffer zone between the earth and the heavenly places, and there is a buffer zone there. Angels don't operate in that buffer zone, and man is never going to get out there past that buffer zone. And he better be glad of that. And the reason he better be glad is because there are angels out there that are not friendly to men. And I will tell you, you know what? I don't know how many of you are Star Trek people, but I will tell you this. They'll make the Borg and the Klingons look like kindergartners. These are not to be messed with. But there's a buffer zone out there, and thankfully so. So you don't notice it, because when we fire off a space shuttle, it can just go up and just go wherever it's going to go. But when you get out in the creature, when you read the accounts of angels that are passing through those different territories, even to come to the earth, they have to travel in specific paths. They can't just go willy-nilly wherever they're going to go. It's hard for us to think of it like that, because you just look out there and you just see a bunch of space. But now look at this thing. Think of those impulses. Are those things going to get done any other way than following those paths? If they don't follow, if these impulses don't follow these paths, guess what? There's not going to be anything, is there? That's just going to be that. Well, what if this? And I think this at least bears saying it this way. Now, that's in the human. That's in the human brain. What if the same, now by the way, if we brought a brain out and just set it on Gloria's table up here, could you see that? Too small. But let me ask you this. What if in the creature, what if in this whole creature, what if you're really looking at that kind of thing right there, and you're looking at the paths and ways that you would get from one part of a creature to another? That's just something to think about. I thought that was pretty interesting. Remember that angel that was coming to give Daniel the answer, and he says he was held up for 21 days in that part of the heavenly places known as Persia? Remember that? He had to go through certain paths to get here, and he got held up for 21 days. He was involved in a battle for 21 days until Michael the archangel comes, and then he was free to come and give Daniel the message. He said, but I got to go back, because he said the Prince of Greece is coming, and he said, I got to go back and help fight. So those paths and we might actually be looking at something that's going to be very close to the paths and ways that are out in the creature out there. I think that's pretty interesting. Now, there's something else to talk about that, but anyway, I just wanted to give you that. All right, now let's catch ourselves back up to where we were, and that's where we left off the last time, looking at those things that whereby we're going to be involved out in the creature out there. And I know that's bigger than a 24th of the slice, but I'm just trying to illustrate that that's the way that's going to be. And we're going to be not just running our part of the creature, but all of those things together are actually going to come into play. Now, let's look at it this way. Here's the government of the heavens. And what you see here is you see main principalities with powers, and then the thrones and dominion. And of course, these decrease in authority as they come down. We're going to be looking at this chart several different times, because there's actually more on here than I wanted to look at today. But I thought it would be fun today to begin to introduce this to you because this is just representing the governmental structure that's going to be in the heavens. Let me ask you this. Is there a seat of authority for every member of the body of Christ up there? A seat of authority? No. That's right. Because not everybody is going to be qualified to do anything in that creature. Now, we'll come back to this, not today, but another time. But this has something to do with that we may be glorified together. That is the phrase that follows the conditional, if so be that we suffer with Him. So the condition of suffering with Him being met means that now we can be glorified together with Him. And by the way, there's several things that are here, and let's just talk about this. First of all, it says, if so be that we suffer with Him. So let's put suffer up here. And then it says that we may be glorified together. And we know that we are going to be glorified together. And we also recognize that we are, because of that glorification, if we do that, that's a joint heir inheritance. All that's being done right here in Romans 8:17, folks, all that's being done is you're being notified about it. I know there's a natural tendency to look at that and say, well, what are the ways in which we're going to suffer with Him? I'd like to see a list of that. And what all does it mean when it says we're going to be glorified together with Him? What does that include? What's involved in that? And another thing is, you may say that joint heir inheritance. I mean, I understand that it's a big deal and it comes out of the Father's business, but I'm not sure I really understand everything that's connected to the joint heir inheritance. And if that's what you're thinking, you're okay. Because all it's done in this verse is introduce these concepts to you for the very first time. In fact, He's not interested in giving you a list right here of any of those. The first thing you have to do is tell somebody about it before you can give them the details of it. You've got to know. And right now, in verse 17, the only thing He wants you to know is that there is a joint heir inheritance. It is conditional upon you suffering with Him. And if you do, that is also going to result in you being glorified together with Him. Now, will you be given, do you suspect you'll be given details further along about those things? Of course you will. And you will know more about what that's about. But really, right now, to do anything other than just that is to try to get ahead of the process. Your Father's just letting you know that this is the way it is. And by the way, I know that for you right now, what we just did here, that's old hat. And I'm glad. And the reason I'm glad is because that means you've got it down. You do realize this thing here that we have now been on for several weeks, that you understand. You understand that you just can't go anywhere else and people understand that. I mean, to you it's ho-hum. Let's move to the next deal. If you went into another church in town and you talked about this issue, they'd all be looking at you. Well, some of them look at you like you didn't know what you're talking about. Okay. There's something I want, if I'm at the right place in my notes here, yeah. I want to give you this breakdown of Proverbs because we're going to go somewhere with this because I'm going to answer now Clifford's question. What about those people that don't have a sonship education? We spent some time talking about the fact of what they won't have. They won't have a joint heir inheritance. They won't be glorified with Christ. They're not going to have a seat of authority in the Father's business. They're not. Ever. That's all dependent upon what you do now. But what will they do when they get there? Just to be clear, are they members of the body of Christ? Do they get a glorified body? Of course they do. So let's do this breakdown because what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the answer to that question out of the doctrinal section of Israel's curriculum, because just as they have adoption, we have adoption, there's some parallels here, and I'm going to pull that parallel out. So the table of contents, you know, is Proverbs 1:1-6. The exhortations start in verse 7 and run to the end of chapter 9, that's in verse 18. The doctrine starts in Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 1 and runs to the end of chapter 29 in verse 27. Then you have prophecy in the last 2 chapters of the book of Proverbs, and it tells you that in the first verse of chapter 30, and that runs all the way through the end of chapter 31. Now there's the way you break down the book of Proverbs right there. In the doctrinal section, I'm going to take you to Proverbs 17, and I'm going to show you something. And in Proverbs 17, you can see this is Israel's doctrinal section. We didn't spend any time in their doctrinal section because their doctrine, I mean, not that there's nothing over there that's parallel, of course there is, but their doctrine is their doctrine. Ours is different, and so we understand that. But I want to show you what is said here in Proverbs 17. A wise servant shall have rule over a son that causeth shame, and shall have part of the inheritance among the brethren. When you look at that verse, 2 things ought to stand out to you. There is a son that causes shame, and guess what's going to happen? Someone's going to do what? Rule over him. Even though they're a son, are they going to be in a structure of authority? They're going to be, well, let me say, they're going to be under a structure of authority. Just because they're not in sonship doesn't mean now they're out and they're going to spend all their days, fishing. They're going to work. But guess who's going to decide the work for them? When Karen saw that, she said, a wise man. Now, by the way, that servant aspect that's sitting there in Proverbs, I understand that has something in particular to do with Israel, but you can't get away from that wise part, can you? And he's going to rule over a son that causes shame. Who would be a son that causes shame? Yeah, a son who was foolish. Remember, a fool despiseth wisdom and instruction. He looked at sonship and he thought, no big deal. That would be a son that causeth shame. Or a son that just lived his whole life contrary to sonship, not even knowing it was there. So the answer to Clifford's question in the first part is, what's going to happen to them? They're going to be supervised by those that are in positions of authority to do whatever they can do. That may change through the course of time, because at the start, here's what you may have to tell them to do. Get out of the way and stand still. I'm being a little bit sarcastic, but not much, because in the beginning, some folks aren't going to be able to do much more than that. You just don't want them messing it up. Just stand over here and watch. Or, you know what? Go with him and let him show you. Maybe something like that. I don't ever think they'll be under the angels. But I do think they'll be under I know they'll be under other sons. But there's a second aspect of this, and that wise servant, it says, and shall have part of the inheritance among the brethren. And that ought to kind of bring into your thinking that this group that we looked at before, where am I? Right there. There's the brethren that have the inheritance. There's the ones that have that. And they're going to rule over those sons that really don't have any of that sonship education. Okay. Now, I guess the thing I think you have this down. I had it in the notes, and I may just leave it at that and not go back over it. But one of the things that has to impress you about the sonship education, about this particular joint heir inheritance, is that not everybody's going to get it. And you know that you're part of a very select group of people, not because you're just so intrinsically great, but because you availed yourself of sonship. You saw it for what it was and you began to do that. There was a timeline, and I don't know if I have it on here or not. Ah, I do. Okay. Boy, I surprised myself, and I did good. Okay. I want, though, you to just mentally take this dispensation of grace out for a moment, and just in your mind, condense that up so that all we're looking at is Israel's program. There's something that I want to do as we look at this. What do we got left here? Okay. There's something that I want to do. I want to take you into, you can see these books of the Bible listed at the bottom. I'm going to take you over to the book of Hebrews, which you know is the doctrine written for the believing remnant when God resumes His program with Israel and brings all that to a conclusion. Now, the reason I want to take you over there is because I want to show you something that I think is important for us to understand. You know about what's taken place in Israel's program up to that. You had Jesus dying on the cross, functioning as the Redeemer. Then in the first 7 chapters of the book of Acts, you have that 1-year extension of mercy. Stephen says, I see the Son of God standing at the right hand of the Father. And because he was seen standing, then you knew that he was ready to usher in this Lord's Day of Wrath right here, which is the 5th part of the 5th course of punishment. And you knew that that was about what was going to happen. We know that God did, though, instead of rising to usher in His day of wrath, He rose and appeared secretly to Saul of Tarsus, saved him, called him to be an apostle, and gave him the revelation of the mystery. And Paul began preaching that, and he ushered in a whole dispensation of grace for Gentiles, something that wasn't known. I think everybody here has a pretty good handle on that, but you understand that before, the only way a Gentile was going to be dealt with was by becoming a proselyte to Judaism, going into the synagogue and putting himself under the Jews, and he was just sort of considered a red-headed stepchild because he was a Gentile, but he was in. Now Paul comes along with a message that says, you can be in and you don't need Israel to get in. And you're not going to have to go to the synagogue to get in. And you're not going to go to the chief priest to get in. Now, God's going to deal directly with you Gentiles apart from Israel. That was heresy in their ears. They hated that message, and they tried to kill Paul for it. Now, here's the things that we're going to look at here in Hebrews. And so let me just take you to this next verse. And we'll come back and look at this. Psalm 2 is going to get quoted in Hebrews. Here's the Psalm 2 passage. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Let me just see if I can find that, because I had some things that were out of order, and I just want to make sure that I'm not going to bypass this. It may be too late for me to find it. I guess. Okay, I can't find it. So here we go. Ask of me, and I'll give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the othermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Now, Hebrews 1:2. Hath in these last days spoken to us by His Son, whom He hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also He made the worlds. I want you to notice the connection between these. Look here. I'll give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the othermost parts of the earth for thy possession. That's the whole thing, isn't it? For thine inheritance. In other words, the Father is saying to the Son, I'll give it all to you for your inheritance. Then in verse 2 of Hebrews, which again is Israel's program, He's appointed him heir of all things. Now, I know we already kind of understood that. And when Jesus was raised with power, well, let's just read this, Hebrews 2:7. Thou madest him a little lower than the angels. Thou crownest him with glory and honor, and didst set him over the works of thy hands. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. For it became him, for whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons unto glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. 2 weeks ago we talked about this verse. Do you remember it? that Jesus was made perfect through the things that he suffered. And what was the parallel? We found out that Paul's going to come along and say, just as Jesus was made perfect by the things he suffered, you are going to be made perfect by, guess what? Suffering with him. And there are some things he is suffering in the dispensation of grace. This is really where we're going with this. What is it that he is suffering in the dispensation of grace? He's not suffering on the cross anymore, so he's not suffering the pain of crucifixion. That's over. That is done with. And because of that, most people think God's not suffering anything in this dispensation of grace because they only equate that to the cross. But actually, he was suffering more than that. I want to take you back now to Romans and show you how Paul categorizes this dispensation of grace. We saw this back in Romans 2. Oh, I'm sorry, Romans 1. We do this first. And declared to be the Son of God with power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. When Jesus raised from the dead, when he successfully, if I could back up to that chart, when he successfully functioned as Redeemer and died on the cross, was buried and rose from the dead, does anybody remember what he said in Matthew 28? All power is given unto me, both in heaven and in earth. He was raised with power. That's why I started to say to you a moment ago. And that's what, let me get back to this verse now, because that's what this verse is talking about. And declared to be the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead. In other words, when he successfully performed that function of Redeemer, remember I had put these other elements up here. The Deliverer, the Avenger, the King, and the Blesser. The only one that was ever in doubt was the Redeemer. Could he do that? Would he be able to do that? Because he had to suffer that on his own. That wasn't guaranteed. And because he did that, because that got done, the provision for all of these is now automatically made. There is no way for Satan to thwart these other mandates of the Davidic covenant. Why? Because when he rose from the dead by his resurrection, he was raised with what? Power. Power to perform the rest of the mandates. Power to get the rest of that done. That's why he said, all power is given unto me. That Matthew 28 thing, because I don't think I have it in the deal. But now here we are in Romans 2. I want to show you that, by the way, let me just back you up. Even though he's raised with power, and he was promised in Psalm that he would be given the uttermost parts for an inheritance, and then in Hebrews it says he's made heir of all things, let me ask you a question. Does Jesus have his inheritance yet? He's still waiting on it, isn't he? Wait a minute, hasn't he done everything he needs to do? He has. Was he raised with power? Yes. When he raised from the dead, all power is given unto me. Is he going to have to go do another cross or something to qualify to get this? No. It's all going to be his. But he's waiting on it. Romans 2. And thinkest thou this, O man, that judgeth them which do such things, and doest the same, that thou shalt escape the judgment of God? Or despisest thou, this is the verse I'm after, or despisest thou the riches of his goodness and forbearance and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance? The law, folks, was the stick. Break my law. What do you get when you break the law? If you're under the law, not you, but when Israel was under the law, what did they get when they broke the law? That's right. They got the curse. They got punished. They got the consequences. They got the stick. But there's another way to get the mule to move. Not just the stick. What's the other?
The carrot.
The carrot. Guess what the carrot is? Yeah. Grace is the carrot. I hate to say it that way, but this really does illustrate it. Because this is the thing that says, get out of line, I whack you. This one says, get out of line, and I give you grace. men are not going to be able to say, well, if God had just given us a little mercy, we could have done it. But, He was always punishing us. So you know what God does? Now He turns around and He gives men grace. What are they going to do now? Well, He should have corrected us. You know what? You can't win, can you? They're always going to excuse. That's why Paul is going to say up here, did I put my elbow on that again?
I think it's a stick.
And thinkest thou this, O man, that judgest them which do such things, and doest the same, thou shalt escape the judgment of God? He says, you're not. You're not. But verse 4, here's what he's saying in Romans, because now it's a dispensation. It's a dispensation of grace. The law was performance. Do good, you get blessing. Do bad, you get the curses. Is grace performance? Not at all. Paul is going to go to the trouble. Now, I don't have them in this PowerPoint, but Paul is going to go to the trouble to say, you don't get your sins imputed to you. In other words, you don't get the stick because you got out of line. Now, in the old days, we used to do it like this. We used to say, if you backslide, God will whip you. Remember that? If you backslide, and we used to say, backslider, we talked, two words were in my vocabulary coming up, revival and backslid. The church needs revival. And, and I understood what that meant. We were going to get on fire for God. But you know what? None of those revivals prepared me to be a son at all. In fact, they didn't talk about sonship at all. What they talked about was just motivating everybody to kind of quit doing bad stuff and start doing good stuff. But guess what? The good stuff they did wasn't done out of their new identity in Christ. It was done in the energy of their flesh. So guess how much reward there was for that? None. Nobody wants to hear that, but that's the truth of the matter. Well, when we get, so now you're under grace, and when you say God's not, it's almost like a bad guy doing something bad and waiting for the hammer and going, oh, I got away with it. Well, did he really get away with it? You're afraid to say, aren't you? Because you're thinking, well, he did get away with it for now, but if he continues that, there's going to come a day when it's all going to come back, and it's going to be imputed back to him when he dies. He is. In fact, Paul's going to call that storing up wrath against the day of wrath. But now look, he is despising the riches of God's goodness and forbearance and long-suffering. So let's talk about those. Forbearance, and this is the word we're really after here, long-suffering. Is God happy with the evil of men? Of course not. Is He enduring it? And you know what He is? He is suffering that. That's why it's called long suffering. He is allowing some things to be done. Watch this carefully. This is important. He is, in long suffering, He is allowing under grace things that He did not allow under the law. That is critical for you to understand. He is enduring some things under grace that the law did not put up with, because there was an immediate response under the law to those kinds of issues. Now, I'm going somewhere with this, but what I want you to do is I want you to kind of have that in your mind. And by the way, we're not just talking about long suffering here, we're also talking about forbearance. And Paul is not going to just mention that word here, but he's going to mention the word forbearance in some other places as well. What does forbearance mean? If you forbear, What? Okay, but it says put up with. That's pretty good. Yeah. It means you're holding back what would normally be a response to something. You're forbearing. You're holding back. Putting up with is not bad at all. And in fact, that's the idea. He is holding back and he is allowing, patiently enduring, if I can use the word that's going to be used with us in Romans 8. He is suffering some things to happen. Are you with me here? And guess what you're called to do? Suffer with Him. Now this is going to introduce a very difficult concept. If your Heavenly Father is allowing it under grace, guess what you are expected to do? Allow it with Him.
Look at the world around you.
Yeah. If He's suffering it, so should you. Do you have to? Nope. But here's the thing. If you have a wrong response to what He is enduring and suffering and allowing, if you have a wrong response to that, how much reward is there in that? None. I'm going to take you back to the thing that I told you at the first. To the degree that you suffer with Him in the like manners that He is suffering things in the dispensation of grace, that is the degree of your joint heir inheritance. So now you would ask the question, then what are the things He is suffering in this dispensation of grace? I mean, that would be the logical question at this point.
I'd like to be one of them, because so many people turned away from just theology in general.
He has, okay, you brought that one up. You're talking about so many people have turned away and okay. Does your Heavenly Father allow someone to walk away from sonship? All right. Does He want them to have sonship? He's done everything for them so that all they have to do is avail themselves of it. I mean, really, He gave them a perfect sanctification, a perfect justification. He gave them a written word. He gave them a spirit when they got saved. He's given them everything they need. There's not like you have to go climb Mount Everest. It's all been, He's done, and He's given it to you as a free gift of grace. He wants you to have it, but He is willing to suffer a son looking at, just like when I've talked to some people about it and they look at that and they listen at the end and they just go, well, I see that and I understand what you're saying, but I just like how we do it at our church. Okay. I'm not being nonchalant about it, and I'm not trying to act like I don't care. What I'm doing is I am suffering with my Father in that. You know what that means? Why am I smiling?
You can't do anything to change it.
Well, I can't do anything to change it, but why else am I smiling? Bigger reward! Because if I fight that, I mean, it's not that God doesn't want them to do it. He does. But they're given liberty as a son to decide about that. Because the first thing you know about an adopted son is what? Huh?
They have freedom to do what they
Okay, they do, but before a father is actually going to educate a son to labor with him, what's the one thing he's looking for in that son? He's got to want it. Because if he doesn't want it, it doesn't work. That's why I've said to you way back there, and I know you recall that, if someone is making you come here, it's not going to work for you. You've got to be here because you want to be here. If you don't want to be here, this means nothing to you whatsoever. And will your Father let you walk away from that? Absolutely. He will. And is He going to go punish them? Is He going to go give them a flat on their tire? No. But what will happen? What is the consequence for walking away? There you go. No joint heir inheritance. No glorification with Him. No position in the heavenly places. You know what? Somebody in Glen Rose used that very same terminology, Teresa. Now I'm trying to wonder who that is, because y'all must be two peas in a pod. No, maybe it was Linda last week. It was Linda. That's who it was. She said, beat them up or something. I don't remember. Do you remember that? She's violent. I pray for Eric all the time. What was it you said? You said we get to slap them. Okay, well, see, that's exactly what she was saying. But you know, here's the thing. They're going to lose. They'll lose that. But God doesn't mean it to be that way. You're going to have to suffer. That's why. Look, in the old days, I used to do everything to try to get people to come to church. We had big days. When I say a big day, you know what we do is you'd have special singing. You'd bring in this group that did some drama thing, you know. You'd have stuff set up outside afterwards for this big fellowship. Not only a big tent with all kinds of food laid out or in the fellowship hall, but outside you'd have this corral set up for little kids to have pony rides. You'd have the blow-up thing for kids to jump in. You'd have games for them to play. And people would see that. You'd put an ad in the paper, and you'd promote it, and you'd promote it, and you'd visit, and you'd get everybody in church. Remember, Bob, we did this at Sanger. You get everybody in church to call everybody they knew and say, we're having a big day. Just come this one day and help us reach our goal. Yeah, pack a pew, right, all of that kind of stuff. Now, when I was in Sanger, we were averaging 50 in church. That was our average. We took an 8-month average, and we averaged 50 a Sunday. And we wanted to have a goal of 300 on a big day. And we were in an old church that was built in the 1800s, and it was a marvelous, it's now a landmark over there. I mean, they actually got it registered for that. But it was an old stone building. It had these stained glass windows. And it had a real strange, I don't want to take a lot of time to tell you about this, it had a balcony in it. Not only, and the pews, it had like this. It had 2 center aisles and then aisles on the outside, because the pews were just like this. And they went back. And then up above you had a balcony. But here's what happened. When you went up the steps and came around, there was a walkway on this balcony that was about 6 feet wide, and it was just a wall like this. And there was a door over here, and over there on that side of the auditorium, there was another door. And you thought, well, you can't put very many people in that balcony. But you know what? They had those walls on counterbalances, and just like a garage door, you could reach down and grab a handle and pick that, and the whole wall went up. Right straight up, and revealed a tiered floor, so that when you put chairs or pews up there, the people behind were automatically higher than the people in front. And that thing tiered up about 8 or 9 rows. And you could close those off. And by the way, there was a wall right in the middle that went back in there. And when you close those off, that was a Sunday school classroom. And you entered by the door. Or you could lift those walls clean up into the ceiling, and now all of a sudden, you got room for a bunch of people. Those were big rooms.
Probably about almost 100, but counting the whole balcony.
I think you could put another 100 people up there. It was pretty good size. So you got this main floor, and then you got this balcony. And I'm going to tell you, when we had that, we had the dog and pony show. We did. We called in every favor we could call in. Our people worked. We built new bathrooms because we had one bathroom in the whole church. One stall.
It was behind the preacher.
And you had to go out right beside me. The door was right here. Here was the platform. You had to go right beside me to go out to go to the bathroom. Very convenient. And
you got to dunk the preacher.
Yeah.
Dunk tank.
Yeah, we had a dunk tank out back. I sat in the dunk tank, and people could throw, the ball and try to dunk the preacher, Of course, God doesn't like that. But anyway, this whole big shebang, when the day came, we had built bathrooms in the back. Bob did a whole lot of that work. And we put in a women's bathroom, had 4 or 5 stalls. We put in a men's bathroom, had a couple of stalls and urinals and all that kind of business. And it was in the back. That was great. Well, here's my point. When the day came, the whole floor was filled up. The whole balcony was full. People were standing on the sides of the balcony and the parts that didn't go back. They were crammed everywhere. We had put chairs over on the sides of the platform. We filled those chairs up. We more than reached our goal. Preached that day. Everybody went out. Kids rode ponies, jumped in the blow-up house, dunked the preacher, did all that stuff. And guess what we had the next Sunday? 50 people. But here's what we felt better about. We thought, well, you know what? We got to preach the gospel to a lot of people. Okay. But you know what? The reason they didn't come back is why?
No reward.
I mean, why? Those people that came, they may have came and said, oh, you know what? That's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. But why didn't they come back?
Their heart wasn't in it.
Yeah, Gloria says that their heart wasn't in it. They didn't want to. So you know what you'd have to do? You'd have to have a big day every Sunday. Even then, they wouldn't come back every Sunday. You know what they would get to saying? Well, they have another big day next week. We'll just skip this one. Finally, you'd have to be giving away $50 bills. Don't get any ideas. And by the way, some folks eventually wouldn't keep coming for $50 even. Do you know? At the end of it. And that's why, and you know what, and when people first heard about Sonship, they didn't get on board, but you know what they said to me? You know what y'all should do? Y'all should have a big day and then, start bringing everybody in and just start teaching Sonship. I said, you don't understand. That's not how Sonship works. This runs counter to everything I was taught in school and everything that I was mentored by other older preachers as I was coming up as a young preacher. This runs counter to that. You have to want to be here. And if you don't want to be here, really, you're better off out playing golf.
Look at how many just show up once a year, maybe twice, but on Easter, Christmas, they show off their new clothes.
You know what? Now, that's the truth. They're not hearing you on the camera, so I'm going to repeat it. How many people show up just on Easter and Christmas? People have that idea. In fact, we used to say to some folks at Easter, we're going to go ahead and tell you Merry Christmas now because we know we ain't going to see you again, until then. But, I mean, that's true. Folks it's just kind of a deal you do. And you know what happens? A lot of folks just show up on Sunday because that's what you do. We just do it. And so if someone came in and started teaching Sonship there, that group doesn't want to hear that either. So,
If I go to church every Sunday, I want to go to heaven.
Yeah, there is the idea. If I go to church every Sunday, I'm going to get a reward. I'm going to go to heaven. God's going to be happy with me. I did my deal. But now Sonship changes all that understanding. Well, okay. Well, I kind of took that further than I needed to, but I just wanted you to see that your father is suffering some things, and it's not pain. Now, by the way, are you going to suffer things in this present time that are painful? Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And do you know what? He's going to allow that. He is going to allow that. I need to finish with this because we're out of time. I have 49 seconds. I used to get these, yeah?
That's a classic example of a father giving his son a spanking when he has to. He really doesn't want to, but he has to allow that in order to teach him.
Well, he does.
Suffering.
Physical suffering, yeah. Except
But the suffering that the father is suffering is up here.
the suffering he is doing, first of all, yes, Clifford is saying the suffering that the Father's doing is up here. There is a lot of that. Jesus is suffering the fact that he hasn't yet gotten his inheritance. He's waiting on it. And guess what he's doing? Patient endurance until that time comes. Didn't Satan offer him the kingdoms of this world? Sure, he did. And No, so Christ is not suffering pain, but he is suffering in the way of allowing some things to happen that he did not allow to happen under the law. That's a principle that I just should leave you with that principle today.
What we're doing, putting on display.
That's right. We are putting something on display, and that's the reason he's not doing it that way. First of all, it wouldn't be grace if he did, because then you'd be back under the law. And if you're back under the law, how much sonship can take place under the law? None. So he knows that this is the way it has to happen. But I want you to think about the answer to this question. Here's your homework assignment. God is doing something else. He is allowing under grace what he did not allow under the law. Now, what's the other thing? And just be thinking about that. There is something else. That just as you have a two-part thing there, he is allowing something under grace that he did not allow under the law. I need you to see the other side of that coin and think to yourself what that might be. And we'll talk about that thing first when we come back next week.
He is allowing?
Just think about that.
I mean, the other thing is something he's allowing also?
No, it's not something else that he's allowing. I'm not looking for any of the things that he's allowing. I'm looking for you to take that and flip it around to the other side. Just think about that. Just think of it that way.
Well, when we didn't get any more people because of that day, don't you think Jesus was suffering because of that? That we couldn't get any more people to...
I think it was suffering because we were so far from sonship. Because if we'd have had them, what would we have done with them? If they'd all come back every week, you know what? Yes, I would have tried to preach good stuff, but you know what? They still wouldn't have been educated as sons. And I do regret that. Are you too far in the dark here? All right, just flip this. Just turn it completely around. If he is allowing some things under grace that he did not allow under the law,
This is part of his long suffering.
yes?
So there's two parts.
There's another element to this. I think, let me see, it may be in your notes, but I'm not sure. Let me just look here a second. Hold on. Okay, I can clarify it to you this way. Okay, let's say it like this. I'm going to say yes to your other question. There is something else he's not allowing. It's kind of the other side of this coin. God just gave you the answer. Whoops. Okay, don't think about that. All right.
So with our freedom, we don't have the punishment, is what you're
Well, there's something more than that. Just think about that. We'll carry that next time. You have notes anyway. You'll be able to see a lot of this in your notes. All right, let's have prayer and we'll be done. Father, thank you for your goodness.